So welcome to everybody, and thank you for attending our Juneteenth program. I first became aware of Juneteenth a long time ago when I was in law school, and that's probably due in no small part to the fact that I went to Howard Law School. And in a previous position before I came here, I also spent 13 years in Texas, where I actually saw annual Juneteenth celebrations long before it was a federal holiday. So I'm happy to see Juneteenth gaining in popularity and respect in the rest of the country. But now it's time to turn it back to Jackie Freeman, who is our Senior Director and Special Advisor to the President for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion here at WMU Cooley Law School. Director Freeman has the privilege of introducing our distinguished guest and to get this program going. Jackie?
Thank you, James. Valada Flewellyn, poet, storyteller. Valada Flewellyn is the author of 7 books. Her first book was Poetically Just Us. Her most recent book is For the Children, The History of Jack and Jill American Incorporated. Jack and Jill was founded in Philadelphia in 1938. It is the oldest African American family organization. Valada is the curator of several exhibits and has produced and narrated several documentaries. The exhibit, A Pilot Lights the Way, pays tribute to Jesse Leroy Brown, the first Black naval fighter pilot. Brown was subject of the recent film Devotion. The A Pilot Lights the Way exhibit and documentary traveled in celebration of the 100th anniversary of naval aviation and was on display at the National Museum of Naval Aviation. Valada has penned commemorative poetry for a number of organizations and individuals: the 125th anniversary of Meharry College, the 25th anniversary of Liberty Bank in New Orleans, the dedication of the monument of Mary McLeod Bethune at Bethune-Cookman University, a tribute to Black journalists and broadcasters. She has shared her poetry at the unveiling of several historical markers commemorating persons who were lynched. A lifelong social justice advocate, she is the founding member of the Alliance for Truth and Justice and an affiliate of the Equal Justice Institute, a member of Bridging the Color Divide, a lifetime member of the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. She is the historian of the Dorothy Turner Johnson branch. Valada serves on the board of the Credo School of Art in Winter Park, Florida. She is a member of the Seminole County branch of the League of Women Voters. Valada is an honorary member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Incorporated. She is married to Thomas Flewellyn Jr., the mother of 3 children and 7 grandchildren. She and her husband are avid golfers, and she is a member of the Washington Shores Presbyterian Church in Orlando, Florida. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Valada Flewellyn.
Thank you, Jackie.
Welcome.
Thank you, President McGrath and Terry Carrilla. Thank you for the invitation to share Pride Month and Juneteenth with the Cooley Law School. It is my delight to be with you today. I'm going to begin by doing 2 poems from my very first book, Poetically Just Us. And the poems are The Storyteller and The Evolution of the African American. And I'm just going to go from one poem to the other. So if you listen carefully, you might be able to detect the transition from the storyteller to the evolution of the African American. I often have the fear that one day I will wake up with nothing to say. No new ideas, no quick replies, no sobs with the tears when I cry, and no opinion of what's in the news, no advice for my husband on which tie he should choose. Nothing, I mean nothing, would I have to say. I'd look at life and decide, I'll take it that way. I won't try to change things. I'll leave things alone. Hear the ring, not run to the phone. You'll ask me a question. I'll look in your eye and just shrug my shoulders and not reply. Yes, this is my nightmare. I wake up with this fear. But listen, I've got stories. So listen up. Here. Now, a man came from Mars and he wanted to know, just what color is a Negro? Well, a Negro used to be black, my friend, till old Massa put his 2 cents in. Then we became all shades, my fella. Why, some of us became downright yellow. Why, we became so many hues, folk got downright confused. And we started calling all Negroes colored. Why, black started taking on a negative tone. And we started wishing our black was gone. Then a mighty fine fella started shouting out loud, saying, hey, we all black, and we ought to be proud. Why, he gave us a whole new point of view and accustomed us to our darkened hue. Well, we stopped wearing our hair bones straight, and we went into what we called our Afro state. Fist in the air, we would shout out loud, telling the world we black and we're proud. And we began to search for from whence we came and gave ourselves again a brand new name. African American was our new cry. So we never have to explain, what color am I? That's the storyteller and the evolution of the African American. Now, thank you. History is often overlooked, sometimes kicked aside, buried in our hearts, our minds, never to confide. Then history has no purpose, and like an old tossed shoe, is of very little value to me or to you. But today, we pause to recognize, to celebrate, to advocate the richness of our African American history. Today, we remember the most important news that ever reached the ears of Africans enslaved on this continent. The news that President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation on January the 1st, 1863, announcing that all persons held as slaves within the rebellious areas are and henceforth shall be free. This news, long anticipated and prayed for, traveled swiftly across the country. However, slave owners in Galveston, Texas, kept the news to themselves. In a 1941 recorded interview, formerly slaved Laura Smalley recalls that day, June 19th, 1865, when slaves in Galveston, Texas, were told that they were free. She said of that blessed day, we didn't know where to go. Mom and them didn't know where to go. You see, after freedom broke, they started just like to turn some of them out, you know? We didn't know where to go. They turned us out just like, you turn out cattle, I'd say, and the old master didn't tell no one we was free. No, he didn't tell. They went there and they turned them loose on the 19th of June. That's why, we celebrate that day. Colored folks celebrate that day. Celebrate that day. A poetic interjection from an excerpt from Echoes of the Enslaved by Valada Flewellyn. Humans sold, souls lost, greater than Laura's sorrow, old Massa's cost. Enslaved Laura suffered on bended knee. Old Massa suffer for eternity. Although the Emancipation Proclamation did not end slavery in the nation, it did fundamentally transform the character of the war. After January 1st, 1863, every advance of federal troops expanded the domain of freedom. The Emancipation Proclamation announced the acceptance of Black men into the Union Army and Navy. By the end of the war, almost 200,000 Black soldiers and sailors had fought for the Union and freedom. The Battle of Fort Pillow, also known as the Fort Pillow Massacre, was fought on April the 12th, 1864, on the Mississippi River in Henning, Tennessee at Fort Pillow. The battle ended with soldiers commanded by Confederate Major General Nathan Bedford Forrest, who ordered the massacre of Union Army soldiers attempting to surrender. Many of the soldiers were African American. Historians agree that the battle at Fort Pillow marked one of the bloodiest, saddest events in United States military history. I might also mention that General Forrest became the first Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan from 1867 to 1869. From the first days of the Civil War, enslaved people had acted to secure their own liberty. The Emancipation Proclamation confirmed their insistence that the war for the Union must become a war for freedom. It added moral force to the Union cause and strengthened the Union both militarily and politically. As a milestone along the road to slavery's final destruction, the Emancipation Proclamation has assumed a place among the greatest documents of human freedom. Juneteenth is a combination of the words June and 19th. The holiday commemorates the day that Laura Smiley remembered when more than 2 months after the end of the Civil War and more than 2 years after Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, the enslaved Black Americans in Galveston, Texas, were finally informed of their freedom. General Gordon Granger brought the message, all slaves are free. He was accompanied by soldiers who came not only to inform, but to enforce. Some of the soldiers arriving in Galveston that day were Black. Imagine seeing a Black man in uniform coming to liberate them, bringing the good news that President Lincoln had signed the Emancipation Proclamation and all of the enslaved were now free. What joy, what jubilation. Now, the first official celebration was at the Galveston courthouse on January the 1st. A procession marched down the court from the courthouse to the Reedy Chapel AME Church, founded in 1848. It was cold and rainy. The formerly enslaved marched to the church. They marched there because they believed that they were freed by God. I would imagine they were singing an old Negro spiritual as they marched. The newly freed were exuberant. A new chapter in the American story miraculously began. Certainly something worthy of a national celebration. Juneteenth, however, was not the first celebration of freedom. The first celebration of freedom took place on Watch Night, December the 31st, 1862, when those enslaved in the Confederate States gathered together in their churches and private homes on the night before US President Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation was expected to go into effect. Pending his signing of the document, the enslaved, soon-to-be free Negroes stayed awake all night and watched the night turn into a new dawn while waiting for the news that the Emancipation Proclamation had been issued, thus making all those enslaved legally free. According to Britannica.com, the tradition of watch night may be traced to the early 18th century in Moravian churches, where churchgoers began marking the occasion with a visual to reflect upon the year past and to contemplate the one to come. John Wesley adopted the practice for his Methodist followers who had held visuals monthly with the full moon. But watch night was given a new significance among the African Americans, who were able to testify that on January 1st, 1863, their long-held prayer for freedom was finally to be answered. Plantations all over the South began to celebrate. There was a great jubilee. Juneteenth has been celebrated in Texas since the 1860s and became an official state holiday in the state in 1980. At the state level, at least 28 states and the District of Columbia now legally recognize Juneteenth as a public holiday, which means that state government offices are closed and state workers have a paid day off. The number of states to recognize Juneteenth will continue to increase. I'm an Alabama native, and I was surprised when in 2011, Governor Kay Ivey authorized Juneteenth as a holiday for workers in the state of Alabama, joining other states that had already recognized it as a holiday. I now live in the state of Florida, where in 1991, Black State Representative Dr. Alzo J. Reddick introduced a bill that passed, allowing Juneteenth to be recognized as a state holiday in Florida. Juneteenth was first observed in the state of Illinois in 2003, thanks to the guiding vision of the Illinois Legislative Black Caucus. Governor Spritzer signed the declaration of Juneteenth as a formal state holiday in Illinois on 2021. Juneteenth came into national prominence a year earlier. In 2020, when there was nationwide protest after George Floyd in Minneapolis and a Louisville, Kentucky woman, Breonna Taylor, were killed during encounters with law enforcement. Both Floyd and Taylor were Black. Their deaths called international attention to the ongoing racial inequities in the justice system, as well as the legacy of slavery evidenced in encounters between Black people and the police. The public was made to clearly see how slavery took on a new form in our legal system: mass incarceration. More than 150 years after enslaved Africans and their descendants were released from bondage through ratification of the 13th Amendment, which reads, "Neither slave nor involuntary servitude, except as punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist with the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction." That slavery exception continues to encourage mass incarceration and permits the exploitation of incarcerated individuals as low-cost labor. June the 17th, 2021, President Biden signed the Juneteenth National Independence Day Bill. The bill declared that June 19th, the day which celebrates the end of slavery in the United States, will henceforth become a federal holiday. Present at the signing was 94-year-old Texas educator Opal Lee, known as the grandmother of Juneteenth. Opal Lee campaigned for decades to make Juneteenth a federal holiday. She actively promoted the idea by leading a 2.5 miles walk each year. The 2.5 miles represented the 2.5 years it took for news of the Emancipation Proclamation to reach Texas. President Joe Biden signed the Senate bill, but at the state level, governments vary considerably in whether they commemorate Juneteenth as an official holiday, a day of acceptance, or something in between. In addition to the District of Columbia and the states where Juneteenth is an official holiday, other states give certain workers the day off, but haven't declared the day a legal holiday. The most recognizable symbol of Juneteenth is the Juneteenth flag. The five-pointed star refers both to Texas, the state's nickname is the Lone Star State, and to the freedom of African Americans in all 50 states. Surrounding it is a nova, or new star, representing a new beginning for all. Juneteenth is a day of reflection, a day of renewal, a pride-filled day. It is a moment in time taken to appreciate the African American experience. It is inclusive of all races, ethnicities, and nationalities. The day encourages us to keep the idea of freedom top of mind. Juneteenth represents the joy of freedom, the chance for a new beginning. Unless we expose the truth about the African American slave experience, Americans won't truly be free. Never must we forget the people who endured one of the worst slave experiences in human history. Every American has benefited from the wealth Blacks created through more than 200 years of free labor. And Juneteenth allows us to acknowledge that debt, to encourage every former slaveholding state to follow Texas's example and make Juneteenth a state holiday, to encourage former slaveholding states to follow every day in America, Blacks are reminded of the legacy of slavery. Juneteenth counters that by reminding us of the promise of deliverance. Even on the journey to discovering who we are, Juneteenth allows us to reflect on where we have been, where we are, and where we are going as a people. Never give up hope is the legacy enslaved peoples left. It was this legacy that produced Black heroism in the Civil War and helped launch the modern civil rights era. It is this legacy that we celebrate today, to proclaim for all the world to hear that human rights must never again become subservient to property rights. History books have told only a small part of the story. Juneteenth gives us a chance to set the record straight. The story of the news of freedom, held back from those enslaved in Galveston, Texas, until June 19, 1865, forever stands as a story that encourages us all to remember the words penned by songwriter Solomon Burke. And there are people still in darkness, and they just can't see the light. If you don't say it's wrong, then that says it is right. We got to try to feel for each other. Let our brothers know that we care. Got to get the message. Send it out loud and clear. None of us are free. None of us are free. If one of us are chained, none of us are free. To the enslaved Black people in America, the message of freedom did not ring clear until it was transmitted to every enslaved ear. None of us are free until all of us are free. Thanks be to God. And now I will, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And now would you like for me to entertain questions before I go on and read?
Yes, absolutely. Or did you want to continue reading? Did you want to continue?
I can.
Okay.
I
And then
can answer questions.
yeah, we can do Q&A at the end, but if you have more, please, by all means, share with us.
Okay. Okay. Well, what I would like to share with you is my poem. It's called White Caps on Waves. And this poem, I should tell you, was written after I read a Zora Neale Hurston folktale. And it inspired the poem I'm about to share with you. The name of the poem is White Caps on Waves. And before I read the poem, I would like to read to you the folktale that inspired the poem. It goes, the wind is a woman, and the water is a woman too. They used to talk together a whole heap, talking about their children. Wind used to go sit down by the ocean and talk and patch and crochet. They were just like all mamas. They loved to talk about their children and brag on them too. My water used to say, look at my children. I got the best and the littlest in the world, all kinds of children, every color in the world and every shape. My wind bragged even louder than my water. Oh, I got more different children than anybody in the world. They flies, they walks, they swims, they sings, they talks, they cries. They got all their colors from the sun. Lord, my children, sure is a pleasure. Tain't nobody got no babies like mine. Now my water got tired of hearing about my wind's children. So she hated them. Every day, a whole passel of her children come to my wind and say, Mama, we thirsty. Can we go down and get a cool drink of water? And she says, yeah, children, run on over to Miss Water and hurry right back now, soon now here. When them children went to quench their thirst, Miss Water grabbed them all and drowned them. When her children didn't come home, my wind got worried. So she went down to the water and asked for her babies. Good evening, Miss Water. You seen my children today? The water woman said, "No, my wind knew her children had been down to Miss Water's house. So she passed over the ocean, calling her children. And every time she called, the white caps would come up on top of the water. And that's how come we got white caps on waves. It's the children coming up when my wind calls out for her lost babies. So when you see a storm on the water, it's my wind and my water fighting over them children." That story inspired me to write the poem that I call White Caps on Waves. And it goes, "White women, you are the water. Black women, the wind. Together, we gurgle in the belly of a storm of sin. Children need water to satisfy their thirst, the sanctity of motherhood. Children, the salt of the earth. They flies, they walks, they swims, they sings, they talks, they cries. They serve in battles and they dies, taking their colors from your fathers, your husbands, your sons, my children, to the water run, dodging lies, ropes, axes, and guns. They run, trapped in our storm, time and time again, trying to quench their thirst. My children are the wind. The wind may seem impossible to embrace. Look at your children. See my children's face. White caps on waves." Thank you.
Wow.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much.
And now I'll be happy to address any questions that you might have about anything you might ask. Should I be looking in the chat for questions or
Actually,
how?
I can watch the chat and direct any questions.
Okay.
So I will
Oh.
start with Professor Mabel Martin Scott. You have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much for what you've given. I am life member 30 years in Jack and Jill of America. And so it's just an amazing organization for young people. And I recently, thanks to Ms. Freeman, looked at your gift to them, which was absolutely amazing. So I want to thank you for that. And I wanted to ask you, how did you decide to write that? And I don't know. It's amazing in terms of going back and putting that type of a book together. What inspired you first, and how did you decide to do that?
Well, I would like to say it was inspiration, but actually it was a wonderful opportunity that came to me. The book that you saw, For the Children, was the second history of Jack and Jill that I wrote. And I wrote that myself. But prior to that book, there was another book that I participated in writing, and this is it. It's called Jack and Jill of America Into the New Millennium. Now, this is the second recorded history of the organization. And I joined two other authors, Adele Baker and Lillian Sears, in penning this book in 1999, right before the new millennium. And so this was the first book. Adele Baker had been asked to write the book, and she asked Lillian Sears and myself to join her in that project. So I was very privileged to have that opportunity. Fast forward years later, President Jolie Cooper approached me to say that the organization was having its 85th anniversary, and she wanted me to write the new history, to update the history book. Now, of course, before I did it with two other authors. So the opportunity that she offered me was a real challenge, and it was really, really scary to have to do it on my own. But as I reflect back on how blessed I was to have those two ladies in my life, they were both retired librarians. And little did I know that I was being mentored and coached and groomed for an opportunity that would come many years later. So with a lot of prayer and remembering the faith that Adele and Lillian had placed in me, I went forward and was able to produce for the children as I was asked. So it was really a privilege. And I'm so happy to hear that you appreciated my labor and found it to be a worthwhile publication. This is for the children.
Yeah, and to comment, your original work is something that's given out for membership once you join automatically. And it has been done, like I said, 30 years ago, I received one, the first book that you did, but the second one I wasn't aware of. And just on behalf of everyone, I just really wanted to thank you. Yes.
Okay, so you have this one.
I do.
Right?
Yes.
Oh, okay, yes. Now this one is out of print. So
yes.
Hold on to it. It's very special. And this is the most recent. This is what the new members are getting when they join.
I see.
I would hope that that's the case.
Yeah, excellent. Again, thank you.
You're welcome, and thank you for your question.
And next we have Professor Manalia DeBose. You have the floor.
Thank you. I wanted to also add that proclamation, and by the way, I'm a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority, and I was on the first line after the charter line at the University of Florida. My sister was on the charter line at the University of Florida. Yeah. And Proclamation Day in the state of Florida is May 20th, 1865. And here in Hillsborough County, there's documented the sale and purchase of slaves after that date. And the Tampa History Museum has done work on that, and the curator is Fred Hearns. So Proclamation Day in the state of Florida is May 20th, 1865. So we were not quite as late as Texas, but close to it. But again, there's documentation of slaves being sold, bought and sold, even after our official Proclamation Day. And tonight on WEDU, while I'm teaching compliance, there will be here in Tampa, there will be a special on PBS, A Legacy of Service, which is the history of Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority. It's been on before, but it will be shown tonight on the PBS affiliate here in the Tampa Bay area. So Dean McGrath, I'll be teaching, so I'll watch it on demand after that time.
You bring good information. Thank you very much. And were you present at in 2002 in Orlando?
I was. You mean for the Boule?
Yes, when the Boule was in Orlando.
No, I was a terrified COVID person. With
no, 2002. I
okay.
I was installed as an honorary member in 2002 in Orlando.
And I lived in Orlando at that time, but I don't remember it because I've always been active here in Gamma Theta Omega in Tampa.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, hello, Sora.
All right, hello.
Hello.
And do we have any other questions from our audience members? And I see Miss Teleferno. Apologize if I pronounce your name wrong, but
Calafero?
Calafera, you have the floor.
Thank you kindly. Good afternoon, everyone. And Valada, hello to you.
Good afternoon, Rhonda. Hello. Glad you joined us.
Thank you. I have a question about Juneteenth, if you will. I, like many of you, listen to the news regularly, and we hear things about some school districts, some states are choosing not to include literature, if you will, that might be considered, quote, offensive to some or not, or so. So let's say a K to 12 young person goes through his or her school district throughout America and then decides to go to college. I guess my point is, at what point does Juneteenth present itself in a more of a study part or some sort of experience at the university? Is it important that the university captures that in some way? If you've missed it in the K to 12 experience, is there an obligation or is there some responsibility that the university promotes Juneteenth? Is that realistic? No, just some thoughts around that.
Well, I agree with you that it should be considered by the university, but from what I know, now that Juneteenth is a national holiday, African Americans across the country and probably across the world are not waiting on the universities or the schools. They are taking it upon themselves in their churches, in their organizations, and in their community to have events around Juneteenth, to have classes around Juneteenth, to have lectures such as this, to teach about it. So the wonderful thing about it becoming a national holiday is it called that kind of attention to it. But like I said in my lecture, it really began to come into prominence after the George Floyd and Breonna Taylor incident. That knee on George Floyd's neck woke America up to the position that Black people have in America. There's a knee on our neck.
And maybe I look to say not necessarily for the for African Americans who in some way would probably look at this, but how about others who are non-African American? Is there some responsibility where they get this experience, or along the way, if they have missed it in that K to 12 experience somewhere, where do they then become educated to Juneteenth and the positive aspects and how it influences them positively as well?
Well, I am very proud to report that African Americans are very inclusive. So when we have a story to tell, we tell it. And so we are boasting the story, but we're not excluding anyone. I mean, and African Americans aren't the only ones telling the story. We know that there are many people of all races who have embraced the African American story and who are sharing it freely with their families and their schools and in their organizations as well. So I think that that we're beginning a new wave of information that hopefully will make a significant change in the way we live in America and the way we treat each other. And I think that Juneteenth is just another thing to help us on that journey.
Thank you.
What I would want to ask if there are professors on the line, what they think, because they know more about the college experience than I could even begin to imagine. So I would open up an answer to anyone who might have that information, the answer to that question.
We have plenty of professors in the room. I invite any professors or anyone else to go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
Renaya has her hand up.
I'd like to say I am a certified secondary social studies teacher. And I held various positions up to assistant superintendent. I was Executive Director of Training and Benefits in Orange County Public Schools for Ron Blocker for 5 years. His wife,
All right.
his wife actually pledged with my
Gloria.
sister, and Gloria's mother and my mother were nurses together for about 40 years in Pensacola. But one of the things that I can say, having been a certified educator since 1978, K-12, we have gone backwards in this country in the study of diversity and different people. And we've got work to do. And K-12 education has work to do. When I was in the 4th grade, my sister and I integrated the schools in Escambia County. And I had an older white lady, Miss Roberts, who was my 4th grade teacher. And I remember turning, and anybody that read my tenure packet heard this story. I remember turning the page and seeing pictures of slaves, and I started to cry. And she sent the other students out for PE, and she said, "Renelia, what's the matter?" And I said, "I don't know how I'm going to do this." And my dad was part of the civil rights movement up in the Panhandle, honored by the governor for 50 years of civil rights work up in the Panhandle. And she said to me, "We're going to do it, and everybody will be kind, and we're going to tell the truth in our class." I decided that day to become a social studies teacher. And I wonder very often about Miss Roberts. She was probably the antithesis of the person that you thought would say that. And so I like to tell Miss Roberts' story because there's kindness among all of us. And we have to be willing to tell our story in truth. It's so that we won't repeat it in history. And but we as the state's social studies teachers of K-12, we've got work to do. And but I just wanted to put that out there, that individuals can make a big difference. Miss Roberts changed my life, and I knew I was going to be a social studies teacher because of Miss Roberts and the warmth and caring she showed me as the only Black child in the 4th grade at Hallmark Elementary School.
Yeah. And it's stories like that. And the reminder that none of us are free until all of us are free. And we're beginning to realize how codependent that we are. And race hopefully will become less of an issue than it has been, based on how we as individuals come together. You know, look at my children, see your children's face. You're telling stories, and there's someone on the line that I have to tell a story about. I see my father-in-law in the audience, and I would just like to say hello to him. And I'd like to tell you a little family story. My father-in-law, Thomas Flewellyn, his brother Ichabod Flewellyn is known as the father of the African American Museum. Ichabod Flewellyn in 1953 founded the first freestanding African American museum in the country. Prior to that time, artifacts were held in colleges and institutions. But Ichabod Flewellyn was determined that we have our own museum. So his brother, Ichabod Flewellyn, founded it. And my mother-in-law, Barbara Flewellyn, wrote a book about Ichabod Flewellyn and tells his story. And my daughter did a documentary on him called If You Only Knew, Ichabod Flewellyn. So I would like to evoke his name and say hi to his brother and say how proud I am to be a part of the Flewellyn family. I met Ichabod Flewellyn at the age of 13 when I was a rebel doing a campaign to get Negro history in the Cleveland Public Schools. And I looked in the newspaper and saw an article about Ichabod Flewellyn. So I asked my mom if I could call him. And I called him up on the phone. I'll never forget that day. And he talks like this. He's, "Hello?" And I said, "Hello, I'm Valada Parker at the time. And I heard about your museum and I would like to come and see it." And he invited me to come. So that Saturday, my mom took me to see his museum and volunteered me to work in his museum, which I did until I became 16. And I got interested in boys and not history. So the next thing I knew, because of that probably, I was getting married, and I look over at my reception and who's there? And I go over to him and I said, Mr. Flewellyn, what are you doing here? And he said, you married my nephew. Now, I may seem a little strange that I didn't realize that this was Mr. Flewellyn, but I must tell you that my father-in-law spells his name Flewellyn, and Ichabod Flewellyn is spelled Flewellen. But they are brothers. They are brothers. So I guess the spelling, I never paid attention to it. And like I said, my mind was on everything but as a young Valada Parker. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Any other questions?
I do have one final question for you. What do
Okay.
you know? What do you know for sure?
What do I know for sure? Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so. That's the only thing I know for sure.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your art, your heart, your knowledge, and your story with our community. You have enriched us, you have educated us, and you have inspired us. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation. And please remind them to go on and hear Skin on the Road.
Absolutely. The link is in the chat to the Alliance of Truth and Justice, and we invite you to take a look and to continue learning. And our sincerest and deepest gratitude for the gift that you have given us on this day, June 19th.
Thank you.